And first order of business, if you could turn to the person on your left, and if you could turn to the person on your right, and introduce yourself. All right, just a quick question for folks. I know, a quick question for folks. How often do you do that on a plane? How often do you do that? Always, yes, good HR person. Does everybody know Judy Parkman here? She's a fabulous HR person. She is a human capital professional who worked at one of the premier companies in Silicon Valley that actually was one of the pioneers, inventors of this field called human capital. And there was a marvelous methodology called the HP way. And you'll see a lot of that HP way. I'm also a Silicon Valley veteran. I've done 4 startups. And you'll see a lot of the HP way here, okay, in this. Just to start off, talent is all about, if I were to summarize what we're going to talk about, it's around 3 concepts: attraction, engagement, and retention, okay? And by the way, you're all going to get the slides here, but it's really about that: attract, engage, and retention. Attraction is recruiting. Where do people come from? Do you purposefully and mindfully recruit? Engagement is how do you keep people engaged? How do you keep people motivated? Retention is an expansive term for me, which means also thinking about exiting employees and thinking about a strategy around who you're going to retain and develop. Okay, so in and of itself, a very controversial topic, right? Because we're in the social sector, we're supposed to be nice. And that's actually one of the biggest problems in the social sector, right? When we're nice and not having the best team on the ground in our organization, we're not serving the people we're destined to serve as effectively as we can. And that's a huge tension that we in the social sector wrestle with, which is a good thing. I always tell people in the social sector, wrestling with these issues is a good thing. I started with that little introduction before we actually get started because on the attraction side, I just gave you an easy tip. You should always, how many people here have a tickler file of the most interesting people they meet? How many people have a tickler file? That's actually recruiting tip number 1. I'm a recruiter. My specialty in HR was recruiting. And a tickler file is making a list of people that are gainfully employed, that you meet at cocktail parties, you meet on an airplane, you meet at a bus stop, and you say, wow, that person's really fascinating. I'd love to have that person in my organization. Okay, because we all meet people all the time who are fabulous. And we need to develop, there's a lot of friends of the Omidyar Network in this room, so welcome all of our friends. You want to have a file on your desktop of these spectacular people. And not only do you want to have a file of these spectacular people, but if you really think they're spectacular, you should be building a relationship with them, learning about them, sending them flowers on their birthday. Recruiting is a process, right? How many people here are in a significant relationship? No, we got a lot of people in a significant relationship. How many people here moved in with their significant other after one meeting? Right? How many people have done that? Okay? Recruiting is wooing. Okay? And so for all of you in here who are social entrepreneurs, you have to be wooing candidates and you have to be thinking about it all the time. It's one of the responsibilities of a social entrepreneur, of any entrepreneur, is to always thinking about talent. So that simple introduction. You're here at a conference of some of the most fabulous people on the planet. And so you should be taking notice of some of the people who, in your estimation, are maybe a bit more fabulous than others. And start your tickler file. Because one of the great things about a conference like this is everyone here probably shares your values, probably has a worldview in which solving the world's problems is important, in which thinking about the disadvantaged is important, and about saving our planet is important. So you have a values alignment, which is one of the most important alignments you can have in an organization. Okay. And I'm being reminded by our very, very good friend here. This is Emma. Emma is a student in neuroscience here at Oxford. I told her she's a very smart person, right? And I can prove she's a very smart person because she originally studied physics, right? So she actually does understand rocket science. A couple of moderator notes that I was supposed to start with is silence all cell phones. Feel free to use social media sites. The Twitter hashtag is hashmark SkollWF, so feel free to tweet. I won't take it personally. And then this is a workshop. It's an interactive session. Okay, so I will say things that are controversial. I gave a version of this talk at Stanford last year, and I had literally people standing up and screaming at me, "No, that's not true." And that means people are thinking and paying attention. So feel free to do that in this session. These are my reflections on a human capital system. I think human capital is a system. And we have to be thinking about the systemic interventions we want to make if we want to grow and scale organizations. That's what I primarily do at the Omidyar Network. So a little bit about myself is that I'm a veteran of Silicon Valley. I've also worked at some big consulting firms. And I always say I have the best job in the world because I work with entrepreneurs. I work with the entrepreneurs in the Omidyar Network portfolio. The Omidyar Network, for those of you who don't know, is a philanthropic investment fund started by the founder of eBay, Pierre Omidyar, and we're kindred spirits of the Skoll Forum because I think everyone here knows that Jeff Skoll was the first president of eBay. So we actually have a lot of overlap there. Certainly from a values alignment, which is one of the reasons why I'm here. There's huge values alignment in this room. I'm going to start by telling you what my definition, Sal's definition of an entrepreneur is. You can agree with it or disagree with it. It's my definition, so I get to make it up. And that is, an entrepreneur, in my opinion, is someone who sees the impossible and dares to make it possible. That's what entrepreneurs do. That's why they're the most interesting people on the planet. Because entrepreneurs dare to do what everyone else is saying can't be done. And I've seen that time and time again. So welcome all of you who are entrepreneurs. So I talked about the basic model, and everything boils down to attraction, engagement, and retention. And it's that system. It's the system of attraction, it's the system of engagement, and it's the system of retention. The reason why Judy and I get paid and have had a career is because really in the 1990s, and Judy and I actually were working in the 1990s, we're old people. You don't mind me saying that, Judy. In the 1990s, as we were learning more and more about what we call the human capital system, in which HR became HR as opposed to personnel, which used to be simply setting up rules and setting up applications and getting employees paid, all that's important. But there was no strategic thinking going into the people side of businesses. And a lot of that has to do with the changing nature of capitalism itself and the changing of the business world. In the 19th century, people didn't really matter. What mattered were inputs going into big organizations with lots of immovable capital. And what mattered was what was produced, not who produced it. And that fundamentally shifted following World War II. And that actually allowed folks to start thinking about the importance of people in the workplace. And so human capital, when we're doing it right, is championing our people in the workplace. And I always tell folks that my cardinal rule in human capital is very simple, and that's always do the right thing. And I don't believe that doing the right thing is ever in conflict, or should never be in conflict, it's a false conflict, with good business results. Because when organizations do the right thing, they actually really thrive. So these are the top questions, the top 5 talent questions for organizations. And what we're going to be doing for the remainder of our time together, and these slides will be made available to you. There's a lot of slides here. I've actually put together the whole model. There's a handbook in the appendix on how to do something called an organization and talent review, which is future talent planning for organizations. Really, really important to be doing things like future talent planning. The challenge, of course, for any entrepreneur is the issue of time. One of the things that I do at the Omidyar Network is I'm the executive coach to a number of the CEOs and EDs in our portfolio. And I'll share some of the things and some of the tools over the next hour that I discuss with them. So for example, how many people in here are social entrepreneurs running organizations? Okay, so it's most of you. I'm going to give you one of my favorite exercises to do, and it really does work in moving the needle for effectiveness in you, which is take a look at your calendar. It's called the calendar exercise. How many people in here take a look at their calendar, see the content of their work in a given week, and compare it with what they did 6 months ago? If it hasn't changed, if the content of your calendar, the content of your work hasn't fundamentally changed in 6 months, then you as a senior leader, as the entrepreneur, as the CEO and ED, you're not scaling. You're not personally scaling. And if you're not personally scaling, it's going to be impossible for your organization to scale. Okay? That's the incredible Gandhian insight into leadership, that we have to be the change we want to see. So if we want to change the world through our organizations, then we ourselves have to fundamentally change our complete orientation around how we do our jobs. And if we're not doing that at regular intervals, then I can almost guarantee our organization is not growing and is not innovating. And so you should do that calendar exercise. I say do the calendar exercise every 6 months. If you're a fast-growing organization, I would do it every 3 months. And I would make sure that between 30 and 40% of the content every 6 months is different and is focused on the future and strategic. Too many entrepreneurs, too many CEOs are focused on solving problems. All right, so I'm going to do some reflective exercises with you on this topic, which is how many of you spend most of your day solving problems? Problems in your organization. How many of you spend most of your time solving problems in your organization? If you're solving problems in your organization, you're not thinking about the future and you're not scaling your organization. So that's not your job. I mean, ultimately, the buck stops with you on everything, right? Right. So I get that, right? If there's a flood, you're the first person to respond to the flood at the office, right? Because you care and you care deeply. So, but what I just said is really important. If you're spending most of your time fighting fires, 80% of your time should be spent thinking about the future, thinking about your strategy, thinking about future strategies, thinking about expanding markets, expanding your processes, paying attention to the feedback flows that are coming into your organization so you can scale your business, so you can scale your organization. At the Omidyar Network, we do both for-profit equity investing and debt financing, as well as nonprofit grant making. And we don't make a distinction. All the categories I use in how we approach entrepreneurship is the same set of conversations. And so whether at the Omidyar Network, whether you're a for-profit or a not-for-profit, I have very similar conversations with folks all over the world. Okay. Yes, please. Yeah, no, actually, questions, people should absolutely interrupt me.
I'm Melanie Edwards, Mobile Metrics.
Yes, and if you can introduce yourself, say the organization you're with, but before you do that, wait for a microphone because this session is being taped.
No pressure.
So if anyone is afraid of being taped, we can turn off the camera, before you ask your question. Unfortunately, some of these sessions are taped of me when I say these controversial things. So there's a lot of controversial things of me on the internet.
I'm Melanie Edwards with Mobile Metrics.
Welcome.
Thank you. And my question for you is, you mentioned the 80%, and I'm just curious in what you've seen, is there a tipping point for that? Are there
Yes.
certain criteria where we should be at that 80% in an
It's
organization?
generally,
Joe?
it's generally, and I think everyone will agree, is the reason why you're solving the problems is because you don't have someone else to solve those problems. So it really is a core talent issue. And when you think about, when you create these forcing mechanisms, right? When you create these forcing mechanisms in your organization around, for example, the calendar exercise, that will force you to take a look at your senior team, right? The biggest challenge in what we're talking about for small organizations scaling is whether or not people themselves are scaling. In the for-profit sector, what happens is they get lapped, right? So I was the 24th employee at PayPal. I spent about 10 years there, and when I left, we had 8,200 people in 19 countries. I was the first head of HR and administration at PayPal, and that was my job for the 10 years I was there. Obviously, when there are 24 people, that job is very, very different than when there's 8,200, right? And of the original management team, there were very few of us who were there for those 10 years. Because generally what happens is people are not growing themselves. Now I'm going to give you my other coaching tidbit of the day. There'll be more coming, I think, which is reflection. Reflection is the most important part of leadership development. So not only do you have to free up time on your calendar and change the content of what you're working, you also need to spend about 30% of your time in reflection. That's the only thing that moves the dial in growth in a human being, is reflection. I'm a philosopher by training, and one of the great things about being a philosopher is, well, I'm trying to think, what are the great things about being a philosopher? But I'm a philosopher by training, and so philosophers have been talking about these things called reflection and how to live a better life for thousands of years. And now there's research coming out that actually is verifying what the ancients used to say about how to live a very good life. There was a recent article in the New York Times, just within the last couple of weeks, about unpacking the definition of wisdom, which is a classic philosophical question. What is wisdom? And they actually, some researchers at Harvard unpacked this, and there are three elements in wisdom. Those three elements are cognition, having a baseline of knowledge, reflection, and compassion. That's what these researchers say. And that's also very consistent with a whole sets of philosophical schools around how to become wise. If we think about the greatest leaders, think about the best leaders you've ever worked with. We've all worked with great leaders who inspired us, right? We all have. And if you think about their characteristics, my guess is they were smart, they had cognition, they had baseline good knowledge, they were reflective, and they were deeply compassionate. They were deeply empathetic. And that's how they influenced and moved us. That's the challenge for each and every one of us, is how do we become more empathetic and more compassionate, more reflective in our work? I think everyone in here is really, really good, probably, if I'm not your executive coach, but my guess is if we had a conversation, a lot of you in here are really, really good on point number one, on cognition. You guys know your problem, you guys know the data, you're getting more data. Data is not knowledge. Knowledge is not wisdom. Wisdom is a different process. And great leaders practice wisdom. Great leaders have judgment, right? Think about the frustrations you have with your staff. Anyone have any frustrations with their staff? Anyone?
Never.
No? Never, right? Think about the biggest problem. Why do you pull your hair out? Because that person didn't exercise judgment. That's why we pull our hair out, right? They didn't exercise judgment. Judgment comes with reflection. And if you're working 80 hours a week, you have no time for reflection, right? And again, new sets of research has shown that you can work 80 hours a week to solve a crisis, but that the ideal number of hours to work is actually 45. That's the ideal number of hours to work. And if you're consistently working more than 45 or 50 hours a week, you actually, over time, become less creative. And the research shows us that. If you doubt anything I'm saying, and feel free to doubt what I'm saying, there's a wonderful organization. How many people in here know it's a US-based organization called the Corporate Leadership Council? Anyone know the Corporate Leadership Council? The Corporate Leadership Council, and if you're a small organization like the Omidyar Network, we get to join the HR Leadership Council. It's the same exact website and it's a little different portal to get in, but it's access to the same data. And it's data about the workforce. It's data about all the trends and about all the information we're talking about. Although it's a US-based institution, it's global data. So the Omidyar Network is a global firm. We have offices in Johannesburg, London, Mumbai. And it's very important for me to pay attention to what's happening with the labor forces generationally. Those of us who are baby boomers, a couple of us are baby boomers, we're very different than millennials, right? Baby boomers spend an average of 9 years at their employer, per employer. Average of 9 years for the baby boomers. Once you get to Gen X, Gen Y, and the millennials, that drops dramatically. For Gen X, Gen Y, I think it was around 4 or 5 years. Millennials spend about 18 months at a company. How many people here hire young people, fabulous young people, and then they go someplace else? Anyone have that problem? Hiring young, fabulous young people, and they're with you for a short period of time, and then they go somewhere else. That's the generational, and that's the generational issue we're facing. So when we're thinking about human capital, what I often talk about is that it's a system. It operates at a micro level, at the organizational level. It operates at the contextual level, which might be my culture, my country. And then it operates at the macro level where those large macro demographic forces and cultural forces operate. We all operate in a cultural milieu. I operate in a fantasy world, okay? Silicon Valley is a fantasy world. It's not the real world. It's a bubble. It's a bubble of wealth and privilege and people who are often self-congratulatory, but it's not the real world. And the only way you can experience the real world is to get out and see the real world, right? Which is what you guys, which is your consciousness. So it's anyone ever have a problem in here explaining the problems that your organization is trying to tackle to a Westerner, right, who has never experienced these issues? Right? There's a cultural divide that exists. All of the things that I'm talking about operate in the talent world, in the talent system. So what this presentation does is it unpacks attraction, engagement, and retention in its system, in how it operates as a system, in a set of systems. So everything I say is dynamic. It depends on the stage of an organization. All of the issues I'm talking about will morph and change if you're a startup, or if you're a mid-sized company, or if you're a larger organization. Because all of the challenges might remain, the questions remain. But the strategies that an organization embarks upon to address those challenges fundamentally changes. Yes? Yeah, is there a mic? Mic, here. You know, I'm quick. And please say your name and your organization.
Sure. My name is Ben Phillips. I'm Campaigns and Policy Director at Oxfam. And you touched on something really important around how people can get stuck problem solving. And you've talked about the importance of reflection. You've talked about the importance of finding new markets, new areas. And one of the things I think that can hold us back as individuals, but also an issue for those we manage that can hold them back, is there are people constantly contacting all of us about problems. Mm-hmm. So the noise is about the problems.
That's right.
So the email traffic, the phone calls is all, can you solve this problem? Mm-hmm. Nobody ever emails or phones, can you reach the unreached? Mm. Can you do that thing we've forgotten to think about? And nobody ever says, can you please spend the afternoon thinking?
Right.
So you touched on empathy and our ability to relate to others, but I guess one of the challenges is one almost has to invent those other voices. In your head, you have to invent the people saying to you, spend time thinking, or invent the voice of the voiceless saying to you, what about me? Where's my, what are you doing for me? I mean, if it's Oxfam, people in Central African Republic, they don't email us or phone us saying, please help. Right. So how do you get that voice into your head and weigh that higher than the traffic coming in of those saying, please fix this now?
That's right. So that is exactly the issue. And my proposition here, very controversial, is that you have to exercise ruthless discipline. And so I'm going to say the best advice. How many people here took a plane to get here? How many people took a plane to get here? Okay. When you sat on the plane, a flight attendant came out in front of the plane and said the following: if there's a sudden change in cabin pressure, an oxygen mask will fall from the ceiling. Please put on your oxygen mask before trying to assist anyone else. That is the best leadership advice that's never listened to, and it's the best leadership advice that we get every time we get on a plane. And any of us who work in the social sector, right, are on planes, right? How many of us are global services on United, right? If you're a United carrier, right? And so, because we're constantly traveling, that is the advice. And I'll ask all of you right now, you all have plane rides home. I tell people all the time, you need to create the reflective places. And planes are great reflective places. Planes are great reflective places. So we're going to get there. Great reflective places to spend time in your own thoughts. I advise people to have meditative practices, and I advise people to take care of themselves. You have to take care of yourself physically, psychologically, spiritually, emotionally. How many people, the first thing you give up when you have one of those problems that come in, right? You don't go to the gym. You skip on meals, or you eat comfort meals, right? We self-medicate. When you're dealing with problems all the time, you have to have outlets. And human beings have to take care of themselves. The human body, the human system, we are a system, will find ways to take care of itself. It will find unhealthy ways of self-medication. And there are healthy ways of self-medication that we can all practice. And these are the key things. They're critical to growing organizations, scaling organizations, and growing ourselves as leaders. And there's a comment and a question back there.
Sue Riddlestone from Bioregional. I just wanted to share that you're so right, you need to make the time to reflect. And I'm not saying I've got it all nailed, but I just wanted to share a little thing that works for me, which is the shower in the morning. Overnight, you kind of process the things that have gone on in the day, and then the next
By the
morning,
way, science shows us that that's true. Science shows us that the brain is always working. Our brain is processing our problems while we're unconscious. It's actually continuing to work on solving problems.
So I have so many aha moments in the shower. So spend a reasonably long time in the shower and give you, and just leave the space for it. It's a good meditative place that you can fit into your day.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you. So this idea of finding time is very, very important. One of the other things I recommend to folks, again, very controversially, I tell people not to watch TV news and not to watch or even listen to news. Get your news from other sources if you have to have news. I always joke with people, anyone who talks to me, I'm always a day or two behind because I get my news from the newspaper. It's a very different experience when you're reading a newspaper, and if you're listening to the TV news, you actually would think that the world is going to hell in a handbasket every day. And the way I know that is from my parents. My father was an immigrant from Sicily. It's a classic immigrant story, worked 2 full-time jobs so he could send his kids to college. He sent 5 of us to college, and now I get to do these fabulous things. My parents are living in their golden age. They're both retired, and they have an incredibly fearful life because they're watching the news. And these things affect us. So one of the other things to think about is, what are the sources, what are the life-affirming sources in your life, and what are the life-draining sources in your life? We all have them. We all have life-affirming things, things that are making us a better us, and then we have these distractions that are making us less capable of who we are. And that's also a tool for tackling some of these issues. Okay. All right. These are the key questions. Who are you attracting? Why do they come? How do you enable people to be successful? Does everyone in your organization know what it means for them to be successful in their job? Okay. How does your team know what's expected of them? Expectations. I'm going to talk about expectations. One of my signature lines, if anyone's heard me speak before, I see a smile in the back. Expectations are nothing more than premeditated resentments. I'll say it again. Expectations are nothing more than premeditated resentments. Okay? And expectations exist in every human relationship. They exist in your personal life, they exist in your family, they exist at the workplace. So managing expectations is extremely important. Making expectations explicit is hugely important. That's what goals and objectives are. Goals and objectives, a performance management process, is a process that makes expectations explicit. And we all agree on the expectations of how I'm supposed to perform. That's what a performance management process is. The way expectations work is that if I'm tasked with taking the garbage out on Sunday night, I live in San Francisco, and our sunset scavenger comes on Monday morning. If I don't take the garbage out, right, it's expected of me to take the garbage out. So when I take the garbage out, what do I get at home? Nothing. It's expected of me, right? It's expected. What happens when we don't take the garbage out? I'm sleeping on the couch. But that's how expectations work. You don't really get anything if you meet your expectations, right? Think about all the successes you've had and how you've gone to your board, and you go to your board and you know you had blood, sweat, and tears to put the organization on the roadmap to reach those expectations that you and the board agreed to, and you meet those expectations. What does the board give you? Good, you met your expectations. Right? It's one of the issues in governance. This is not a topic on governance. We have a governance practice. But that's actually one of the biggest, managing expectations is one of the biggest issues in governance, right? How many people in here have ever had a governance issue with their board? Anyone? No? People have perfect boards, right? Yeah, these are the issues that come up. What do you do with poor performers? And who are your future leaders? We're going to do a quick exercise right here. I want everyone to close their eyes. I want everyone to close their eyes. Don't worry, I'm not going to touch you. But close your eyes. I want you to think about, and not yourself, I want you to think about the highest performing person in your organization. Was that hard? I didn't even give you time to do it, because that person immediately came into your head. Did anyone have difficulty with closing their eyes and seeing the highest performing person in your organization? Anyone have trouble with that? No. All right, open your eyes. Well, your eyes probably, most of them are open. Now let's do it again. Close your eyes. Close your eyes. Now think about the weakest performer in your organization. My guess is there's a couple of candidates you're going through right now. That's a little harder because you got multiple candidates on that one. Am I right? Right? You got multiple candidates on that one. Open your eyes. Here's the reality. And as adults, something we learn as adults is really tragic. And adults, we learn how to lie, and we learn how to pretend that the truth doesn't exist. We learn that. In reality, though, everybody knows the truth. We all know the truth, right? It's how we talk about politics. Politician gets up, they say these things, and we know that it's not true, right? We know it's a little crazy. Everyone in your organization, the exercise we just did, it may not be explicit in your organization, but everyone in your organization knows your top performer. Everyone in your organization knows who is working, goes above and beyond the call of duty. And everyone in your organization knows who's not. Everyone knows who's not. Now I'm going to tell you some research. One of the reasons why Judy and I get paid the big bucks, we really don't get paid big bucks, but I'm going to say that for the tape, is what I just described, going above and beyond the call of duty. That is called discretionary effort. The Corporate Leadership Council measures the discretionary effort of employees, because they survey employees every quarter. And that's what drives productivity gains. What drives productivity gains in the economy are people who collectively go above and beyond the call of duty on a regular basis and invent new processes, invent new ways of doing things. That's how improvements come in. Those people who exhibit discretionary effort. It's why the Google buses exist. So I live in San Francisco. You probably all heard about our Google buses. It's been all over the news everywhere. The Google buses, the Google dinners, all those things exist because they're trying to create a culture in which they have the maximum number of people who exhibit discretionary effort. Discretionary effort is your friend. Discretionary effort in creating systems that drive more employees and motivate more employees to exhibit discretionary effort is what drives scale, results, and innovation. And we know that from the science. We know that from the literature. Now I'm going to talk about those poor performers. On the poor performers who are rewarded. Poor performers who are rewarded. And you may not be rewarding them, but if it seems like that, this is where appearances equal reality, is the number one demotivator of your high achieving employees. The number one demotivation of high achieving employees is seeing mediocre employees or non-performing employees get rewarded. That drives the spirit out of them. Think about how many people here have left organizations. Anyone ever leave an organization? Anyone ever leave an organization? Work at an organization? Anyone ever work in the career, work at more than one organization? Most of us have. Even the baby boomers, because we've been around so long. Think about why you left that organization. Okay? Think about why you left that organization. This is one of the big reasons why people leave organizations. They get demotivated. The other reason why people leave organizations is because they feel like they don't have a manager who cares about them personally. So anyone who's managing in your organization has got to have empathy. And if they don't have empathy, they're going to drive your best employees out of the organization. I'm going to come back to attraction. Everything comes back to attraction, engagement, and retention. Who are you attracting? If you're not attracting A players, if you don't have A players in your organization now, A players are not going to work in your organization. Yes?
So I have a real question about this discretionary effort, because the issue that I face is not lack of discretionary effort. Everyone in our organization is passionate, wants to make a difference in the world, works really hard. The issue is matching the skills and capability with the tasks as if they have evolved. And it's compounded by the fact that I came from a large organization. If someone wasn't performing, it was super easy to help them leave and go find somewhere else they would perform, because there was this pipeline just waiting to fill that opening. And so the challenge I personally face is trying to figure out, when do you coach a hardworking, motivated person to try and get them ready for the next level, versus know that it's time to call it quits, knowing that if calling it quits could mean a hole for an extended period of time, because we don't have the compensation structure to necessarily go out and attract exactly who we need if it's at a higher level, and we certainly don't have the pipeline in a small to medium-sized organization.
That's right. So we have to develop pipeline. It's one of the most important things we need to develop. I started with that. I started with always thinking about recruiting pipeline. The job of a CEO is always thinking about talent. That should be 80% of their job. 80% of your job is either 80% of your job is either thinking about strategy or thinking about your people. And if you're not thinking about developing your people and getting your people into the next level, then I would argue, if I were on your board, I'd ding you. I would ding you as a CEO. The issue that you raised is a very real issue and requires that discipline. It requires so hard work does not equal a discretionary effort. For me, is going above and beyond the call of duty effectively. Yeah. Okay. Hard work. See, this is the problem, and it's a huge problem in the social sector, because we have people who work hard or seemingly work hard. I would actually pull the curtains, go look behind the curtain, because they may not really be working hard. They may have the appearance of working hard. And are they spinning their wheels? That's an ineffective employee, right? Because the key is to constantly improve and find discretionary effort leading to productivity gains is working effectively. And you're right, we have a lot of dedicated people in the social sector. Absolutely. And I'm actually going to talk about the system, something called the employee value proposition. That's actually, where's my timekeeper? We have 30 minutes, right? Okay. Because I want to introduce one very important concept on this very topic, which is in and of itself another system. But the challenge in the statement you just made is a fundamental lack of faith. Here's the amazing thing. All of the social entrepreneurs in this room have exhibited tremendous faith in quitting their jobs, creating these organizations on making money on peanuts, right? Giving up all sorts of opportunity costs, having all sorts of opportunity costs in their personal lives, and for which your family is constantly yelling at you, and have done all of this. You guys have incredible faith in the universe, and you don't have faith in the universe around letting a poor performer go because you're worried about the pain and the hole that's going to leave in the organization. But the damage that leaves in the organization over a period of time is more incalculable. That's the challenge here. And the challenge is, think about yourself. How many people in here have ever worked for another human being? All right? Anyone ever worked for another person? Think about the people who you really enjoyed working for. Why did you enjoy working for them? Number one, they made you feel like they cared about you as a human being. They cared about you personally. That's the key thing, that they care about not your work performance, but they care about you as a human being personally. And in the social sector, we generally get this right. We're very good on this, actually, on this one. But the reason why you really enjoyed working for that person was because they inspired you and you were learning, right? This was someone whom, in that inspiration, you could see, oh, I'm going to learn a lot from that person. I'm going to be able to model. We model our behaviors. I used to be a high school teacher, and I used to love PTA night. Why did I love PTA night? Most teachers hated PTA night. So, oh, the parents are coming in. And I was like, I love PTA night because I get to meet the parents. And the apple never falls far from the tree. It doesn't. And when you meet Mr. and Mrs. Smith, and you're like, oh, that's why Johnny is like that in class. And it's eerie. It's absolutely eerie. And so human beings, look at kids, right? Kids are constantly modeling on the playground, right? Constantly modeling and imitating and playing. That doesn't stop just because we're adults, right? Look at all the clothes we're wearing, right? We're modeling our behavior on trends and fashion and all that sort of stuff. We do it constantly. So it's one of the core aspects of work. And we need to pay attention to that, and we need to have the faith that you have in running your organization, in driving your organization, that you will be able to attract. And then we can talk, and again, we have recruiting modules. This is just an introduction into how complex human capital can be. It's why I have a team that operates on many different levels at the Omidyar Network on all these topics. But you have to have the strategies in place that will alleviate that pain. The other problem that occurs, you actually raised the other problem that occurs, but you didn't identify, you said it implicitly, which is in the hiring process. How many people in here have hired a candidate to alleviate a pain, even though you knew that was not the best candidate? Anyone ever do that in their career? Anyone ever do that? Right? That is also introducing mediocrity into your organization. So there's been a lot of research. I'm going to talk about Jim Collins for a moment. He wrote a Harvard business piece that became Good to Great. And probably everyone is here probably read Good to Great. It's one of the classics. If you haven't read Good to Great, make sure you read it. But in the Harvard business piece that inspired that, he was trying to identify what was the characteristic across all industries of the most successful organizations in the US over a 40-year period. And he looked at all industries, across all industries. And he realized on the leadership front, it was around two things. One, these leaders exercised humility, right? And humility takes many forms. Humility is not a doormat. I always tell people that. Humility is, when I talk about humility, because we have humility as a value at the Omidyar Network, and people often say, well, how do I talk about humility? Humility means that, in my opinion, humility means that I can learn from every single human being I ever meet. No matter what their circumstance, no matter who they are or what their background is, I can put myself in a position to hear what lesson they have to teach me. And really great, think about those managers that I just talked about. Really great CEOs in humility are inquisitive. I think the activity of humility is inquisitive, asking, I don't know the answer, let's figure that out, right? It's one of the great things about, this is the great thing about being a philosopher. Philosophers don't have any answers, we just have questions, right? It's why working with me is often frustrating, because I just ask questions. But that's the key. So all these things become very, very important in our work. And we must not settle. We must not settle. We must endure the pain so that we can achieve the larger prize. So humility was characteristic number one. The second characteristic was a fierce discipline around performance excellence. A fierce discipline around performance excellence. Fierce. I think he uses the word fierce. And that gets to your question about if you have to have a fierce determination to set the structures up so that you will grow as a leader. And you have to figure out ways how to triage that email and how to turn off those problems or how to delegate those problems, right? Often the problem with the problem, right? What's the problem with the problem? It's our ego. When someone calls us with a problem, how fantastic is that? This person trusts me with this problem, right? How wonderful is that, right? That's what's going on a psychological level. We have to have the fierce discipline to not be the world's problem solvers.
Excuse me.
Yes. Oh, wait, we got to get a mic. Okay. And your name, and then introduce yourself.
My name is Sabri Saidam. I'm a Palestinian entrepreneur. I want to say that often in my part of the world, you have to defeat defeatism and be ready to empower people. But how would you be so assertive? You're a human being, you're not a Superman, and you have emotions, and sometimes you don't have the guts nor the energy to empower people. You're morally defeated, but yet to have to counsel people and lead them to accepting that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. How would you do it?
So that is actually the great question, right? The reason why I talk about reflection so much, the reason why I talk about reflection so much is because that recharges our batteries. That recharges our batteries. It gives us the strength. All of you have inner stores of strength. In fact, I would argue some of you have superhuman strength, because that's how you're tackling the problems that engulf our world, right? I always tell folks that who join the Omidyar Network that we're trying to address some of the most intractable problems on the planet, and we have to get up every day and do our best and really try to do that. But we have to maintain that faith of optimism that exists in each and every one of us in the social sector. Once we give up our faith, once we give up our faith in the goodness of humanity, once we give up our faith in being compassionate towards everyone in our lives, starting with ourselves. You're compassionate to yourself if you're taking care of yourself. That's the best management, modeling, behavior anyone can give to their staff. And once we do that, magical things will happen. We'll have the energy, because each and every one of you will change the world, have the potential to change the world. If we don't have our faith, then we become cynical. And I would argue, again controversially, that we become part of the problem. We become part of that defeatist, cynical problem. And the greatest, I think, challenge for all of us in the social sector is to throw our hands up and become cynical. That's why these issues around our internal growth and our internal abilities to help us become like a Moses, the ability to lead the people through the desert. Right? The ability to lead the people through the desert. Or Muhammad. Oh, right. Muhammad. Yes, Muhammad, exactly.
Just to be politically correct.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. So the future leaders is a whole other system. So I'm going to introduce in the remaining time two systems thinking. So at the Omidyar Network, we're absolute believers in systems thinking, which is the idea that everything exists in a dynamic system or sets of systems, and that the most effective intervention points to achieve social impact or to achieve change or behavioral change may not be the most obvious interventions, right? And all of you are, in many ways, innovative entrepreneurs here because you guys are doing something. If you actually did an analysis of your work, a lot of you are actually engaged in systems thinking, doing very innovative interventions that other people hadn't really thought of, right? That's really one of the critical aspects of your success. I'm actually not going to talk about this. Oh, well, actually, I will. I'll talk about this wheel. A human capital strategy, don't read the text. A human capital strategy is all of those elements in your people development processes or the human processes in an organization. It's the people, it's the work processes. Oh, I'm going to stop right down the work processes because there's an exercise that I encourage, especially small organizations. How many people in here are in an organization less than 100? Most of you. Okay, most of you. So this is actually an exercise you can do. I would urge you to, every 6 months, spend some time analyzing every single job in the organization and ask the question, what are they doing? What are they doing? And are they driving the strategy of the organization? It's a very important exercise to do in smaller organizations that are growing, because what happens is you can create, what often happens in an organization is, rather than doing the tough OD reorganization design that says your skill sets are not the right skill sets we need at this time, we actually just add more people because it's easier, because we want to be conflict avoidant. Okay? The other dynamic here, so that's one dynamic. So this is why this is so difficult. That's one dynamic that's at work. The other dynamic at work is, I've been in HR for over 20 years. I'm just going to say 20. And I have yet to meet a hiring manager who has said to me, Sal, I have too many people. Have you ever met in your organization a hiring manager who's ever come to you and said, you know, I think I have too much headcount, and we should give some of my headcount down the hall to my colleague? No, that never happens. That never happens. There's a dynamic that exists in every organization to increase headcount, to increase it, without asking the question, is it the right headcount? So this work process is very, very important. And what I define by work processes is, do we understand every role in the organization? Can you justify every single job in the organization, every single role, and can you connect every single role to the strategy, the ultimate strategy and vision of the future state of your organization? This is a very, well, it's It's an easy exercise to do. It's the implications of that become very difficult, because it means then you may have to change your management structure, you may have to do some organizational design. When you're growing an organization from 0 to 10 to 15 to 20, there are huge inflection points. There's huge inflection points in decision making, in recognition, in information sharing, information processing, huge inflection points. Physically, there are huge inflection points. When everyone is working in the same office, right? I started at PayPal, right? So when we started, we were in a little tiny office above a bakery in downtown Palo Alto. Everyone was in the same room. Information, if someone needed to know how to travel, they stood up and said, Sal, how do I travel? Right? That was the question. They just stood up and screamed. Then we got a larger office. Then we got with like multiple rooms. Then we got an office that had multiple floors. Huge inflection point. Information flows change just when you have people on different floors. And then it gets really dicey when you have more than one building. When you have more than one building, you might as well have more than one country. It's really that much of an inflection point that no one pays attention to. No one pays attention to these inflection points that occur in an organization. People just assume that things are going to occur. So that's why that gets into information and knowledge. There are two things that come up on every employee survey ever done. Number one is people say they're not paid enough. That's always, whenever, I don't know why they even ask that question. And then the second one is people always complain about not having enough information. Okay, people always complain about that. Think about your organization. How many people say, I don't know? Well, part of that I don't know is the people know whether or not you have a decision-making structure. How do you make decisions in your organization? What is the decision-making framework in your organization? Do you have a decision-making framework in your organization that everyone understands? This is how decisions are processed and implemented at our organization. Does everybody know that? If you don't have a decision-making framework, Wikipedia is fantastic. It's in our portfolio. And the Wikipedia has a fantastic article on something called RACI. There's a version of it called RASCI, and it's a decision-making framework. It talks about roles, responsibilities, and the most important thing, expectations in decision-making. The reason why organizations have problems in decision-making is because the expectations are not clear of who is actually the decision maker. Okay? That's the number one problem in decision-making. So you have to have a decision-making framework, and then rewards. I don't say compensation, I say rewards. All of the research shows, now you have to pay a living wage, but all the research shows that non-monetary forms of recognition and reward can be as effective or more effective than monetary forms of reward and recognition. Right? That's why restaurants have the Employee of the Month picture on the wall. Right? Those sorts of things really, really matter, and you have to figure out what are those strategies that work best in your organization and your culture. This is the evolution of HR. I'm not going to talk about that. I talked about it already. Just one thing to highlight here. There's a vision barrier. Only 5% of workforces report understanding the strategy of their organization. Okay. So here's one of the problems. You and your management team talk about the strategy all the time. You talk about decisions all the time. And so by the time you actually make a big decision, it's already socialized with you. But the people who aren't in that room have not been socialized. That is one of the real gaps in management, is the work processes that I talked about, and making sure that every person in their role understands how that role connects to strategy, including the receptionist. Because the receptionist has a major role to play in the strategy of your organization. They're the first voice, the first face of your organization. One of the most important roles in any organization. By the way, when I work with an organization, first person I talk to is the receptionist. The receptionist always knows what's really going on. And the receptionist always knows the true culture of the organization. It's why I always talk to the receptionists. Okay? By the way, recruiting. Always talk to your receptionists about the recruiting process. And ask them how the candidate treated them in the process. Very, very important. Because most candidates, or a number of candidates, or candidates who don't share your values, are not going to treat the receptionist well. And that's a huge red flag for you. And it can be a huge signpost for you in preventing you from making a hiring mistake. So I tell all of our receptionists, our recruiting coordinators, are informed to let us know if anyone treats you in a disrespectful way. Because when the candidate is, we need to get insights into candidates when they're not performing. Okay, this is the other system that I'm going to leave you with. There's like, I don't know, I think there's 40 slides in this presentation. And I was telling Judy at the beginning, I've done this presentation a number of times in a number of different settings. And I've only actually gotten through all the slides once. And that was in South America. Still trying to figure out why it was in South America. This is the other system that I want to talk to you about. There's an employee value proposition. There's a reason. There's actually a set of reasons why people come to work for you. So obviously in the social sector, we're very strong on this. We're very strong on purpose and culture, right? We have a purpose in which we can change the world, tackle some of the most intractable problems in the world. But actually, that's just one piece in the whole system. And organizations have to pay attention to the whole system. Even if you're a nonprofit, you have to pay attention to the whole system. You have to pay attention. This is particularly important with younger workers. We know that younger workers want to be developed. Younger workers want to develop their skill sets. And that's true globally with the possible exception of Europe. Where in Europe, any Europeans in here? Okay, some. Because the possible exception, the issue in Europe is because of the depth of the financial crisis, what's really driving work, it's a little distorted right now, it's driving workers to focus on stability. So when workers are surveyed, including young workers in Europe, they're focusing in on actually just getting a job, okay, as opposed to development. But in the rest of the world, Africa, India, China, the US, younger workers want to be developed. So you actually have to have methodologies around career development, career adventuring, feedback. Feedback is actually the module that I start with whenever I work with an organization. And that whole module is around how do we talk to each other in an open, honest way and avoid being passive-aggressive with each other, right? Because that's one of the big problems in the social sector. We're somehow programmed, or we always have to be nice, and have to be kind. And honesty and kindness are sometimes in tension. And so we have to work through that. There are organizations that have actually developed training on helping us in our communication be both honest and kind. Fantastic organization called the Center for Creative Leadership. Fantastic models on that stuff. Coaching and mentoring. People want coaching, mentoring. People want to be able to learn and grow their skills. People want interesting work. They want the ability to have impact, and they want the ability to gain valuable experience. Why are people happy at work? People are happy at work because they feel that they can self-actualize. This is particularly, bless you, it's particularly important for younger workers. Younger workers want to feel the sense of self-actualization is taking place in their work. So it's very important for us as we're designing those roles, and this can actually take place in your work processes. If you do that work process exercise, you can actually ask the question, what is the nature of self-agency in each one of those roles in your organization? Because for your top performers, to the degree that they have self-agency, that'll keep them motivated. So that's why all of the concepts that I'm talking about can be boiled down to three simple things: attractive, engagement, and retention. But once you peel the onion, it becomes very, very complex because all of these things operate at the systems level. As an executive, as a CEO, as the leader of your organizations, as an ED, I argue you must pay attention to all of these things, okay? And you must figure out what is your employee value proposition. And there's multiple ways of thinking about this. It's a multi-point thinking. Bill Drayton would be very happy because I use the word multi-point. It's multi-point thinking. There's an employee value proposition from your perspective, from the perspective of the organization. Then there's an employee value proposition why someone joins you. The reasons why someone joins you change, morph into other reasons for why they stay. So that gets into the motivation of attraction and then the motivations around engagement, which in and of itself is keeping high performers motivated. It's a dynamic situation, and personal lives also impact. So work-life balance, for example, much more important when workers get married or have kids. When workers have kids, this becomes almost top of mind. Why? Anyone here a parent trying to juggle a life and being a parent? Right? It's impossible, right? I don't know how people sleep, right? I don't have any children, and I don't get enough sleep. So I don't know how parents do it. My hat goes off to them. I often say that the most important social impact you can have in the world is by being a great parent, because those children are going to change the world. They're going to affect the future. But these things are all important. Rewards and recognition, really thinking about every organization I work at, whether for-profit or not-for-profit, says, Sal, you don't understand. We just can't pay. And that's what I hear all the time. It's more than just about the compensation. Compensation is not your employee value proposition. There are organizations out there, Philip Reynolds, right, is an organization, like I always used to joke, I would hate to be the head of HR of Philip Morris. Sorry, Philip Reynolds. Philip Morris, right? Because what's their employee value proposition? They pay people really, really, really well. Wall Street pays people really, 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 really well. The currency of the employee value proposition is compensation. But for most other organizations, compensation is just one piece. What's really important is the whole reward and recognition system. So all of these pieces are what we call HR. There's performance management in here, there's career development, there's development plans, there's career adventuring, there's mentoring, there's coaching, and I'm sorry to say, but you have to pay attention to all of them. You have to pay attention to all of them, and you have to be strategic about all of them. Now you can understand why you're spending 80% of your time on strategy and your people. Because if you're really spending time on your people, you're thinking about all of these questions. You're thinking about all of these topics, and they change. They change for the organization as it develops, as it grows and it scales, and it changes for the employee as they grow, develop, and scale, which is why this system is so complex. It's seemingly simple: attraction, engagement, and retention. But once you get into it, it becomes very, very complex. So we have just a few minutes left, so I'm going to stop there because I introduced the key systems that I wanted to introduce, which is, and it also gives you a sense of how we approach these issues at the Omidyar Network. And there's a couple of organizations in here that we've actually done some human capital work with, so those people can feel free to talk as well. Questions? There's a microphone coming around, and questions or comments would be helpful.
Hi, thank you. My name is Ladislav. I'm from Slovakia. I'm building several enterprises and I suffer with HR issues, except for one when I hired a great COO, and it saved 70 people from the genius sales entrepreneur founder. And suddenly people are smiling because there's a great patient guy who's smart, who listens, who smiles and listens. And yes, it's an interesting, important point. We will help you. I'll put it in the strategy. Where I suffer is in all of my NGOs. And clearly...
And the COO, by the way, is one of the most important roles, in my opinion, in an organization. It's a magical thing, and you can have COOs in nonprofits.
So you can't have revenues with these type of guys, but you can save the organizations once you have a guy who can bring fish into the pond. My question with the NGO or social enterprise sector is, you clearly, if you don't have 150K to pay for a guy in Eastern Europe to be a COO, because your total budget of 7 people is 40K, and you need to make sure that 10 people working for $600 a month are motivated, happy, developed. If we were to wait from all of those things, where do you think focusing most can have the most impact, i.e., every week, guys, I know this is a mess, but I'm working on it, or where is the biggest failure if I don't do so? Maybe it's the same question, but I would really like advice on that.
So
Thank you.
one of the things that you're raising, which we actually, and one of my fears with this presentation, by the way, is I introduce all these different concepts, and I am only asking you to do the things I asked you to do. Very few things. And all of the things I specifically asked you to do involved you, okay? And so I'm always worried that a little knowledge can be, can blow up an organization. So I'm always concerned about the law of unintended consequences. And so the reason why I want to answer your question is on which we didn't talk about, is really recruiting. We have there's a lot of data and a number of slides. So do go through the slides. You'll have a plane ride home. There's a lot of slides in this presentation that go into great detail on all the things I talked about. And I have some tidbits on actually creating processes around recruiting. And those processes around recruiting are, how do we think about recruiting in our situation out of the box? So when people tell me about that they can't pay, okay? Anyone in here ever heard of BRAC? Anyone ever hear of BRAC? It's the world's largest NGO. World's largest NGO. It affects 130 million lives a year. 130 million lives a year. That's scale. They may actually be the only NGO ever to truly achieve scale. Other than the other one I'll throw in there is Wikipedia. Right? There's a couple, right? There's a couple. But very few. Very, very, very few. BRAC doesn't pay anyone in the organization, including Sir Fazl Abed, more than $30,000 a year. And they have some of the best world-class leaders imaginable on the planet. Now, when I talk about this, when I talk about BRAC, I've had the huge privilege of working with BRAC and working with their senior team. It's probably one of the greatest honors I've had in my life of working with BRAC, because I get to see incredibly warm, dedicated people who are motivated by different aspects of this employee value proposition. So now that's an extreme example. Actually, that's a good example. An extreme example is organizations like the Tibetan Government in Exile, in which the average person who works and serves in that organization, which takes care of the Tibetan diaspora, makes $400 a month or $600 a month, including the prime minister, right? And so these folks globally, there are folks out there. And so I didn't talk about it, but recruiting and thinking about different recruiting strategies. And really, there are some exercises, there are some suggestions on the recruiting stuff. But this is where thinking out of the box on recruiting becomes really, really important. And the most successful organizations can do that.
So which of those weighted, you think, if there's 20 things written on that employee value proposition, and each were a weight of 5, where would you put the biggest weight?
So I actually won't answer that question. And the reason why I won't answer that question is because I'm not running for office, is because it depends. It depends on your organization. This is where, so Pierre Omidyar has often said, Sal, you're spending all this time on a plane. Why can't we just film you, what they're doing here, and then just send those films out to our portfolio? And the reason for that is because every concept I introduced today has to be translated to the very specific context of your organization. Every single organization in here is different. So while you may have intellectually these challenges around talent, like you all have problems around talent, but how the talent, and you may all have similar problems in talent around attracting it, engaging it, and retaining it. All of these questions resonate, a lot of these questions resonated with you and your organization. But how you solve these questions that's where it becomes very unique to the context of your organization. And that's hard for people to get their head around. It's one of the reasons why I think human capital can't be learned in a textbook. I think it has to be learned experientially in the organization, because you're dealing with human beings, live human beings, who are constantly changing. And because we're constantly changing, the organization is constantly changing. So, any other thoughts or questions? Because I don't know what I'm holding you up from. Good news is I don't think I'm holding you up from food. That's the worst.
The next session starts at 3, so maybe you can take
Okay, any other final comments? I hope this was helpful to some of you on some levels. So. The last thing I want to say is I want to thank you for all the work that you do. I started by saying that entrepreneurs make the impossible possible. And that's what you do. And so I just want to encourage, first of all, I want to thank you for that work. It inspires me every day to do what I do. I always say I have the best job in the world because I get to serve you guys. And so it's a true honor for me to be able to be here with you today in the presence of so many truly wonderful people. And these are the people, look around you. This is why every problem in the world that we have today will be solved. I tell people that all the time. The problems that we have, every problem we have on this planet was humanly created, which means that every problem on this planet can be humanly solved. And I know that it's the people in here that are going to solve these problems. You may not see it I may not see it in my lifetime because I'm a baby boomer, okay? And we're already being pushed out of the labor force. But I guarantee that your children and your grandchildren will live in a better world. And it'll be because of your work. Thank you.